Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Lily with us. Lily, do you just quickly want to introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
Love to. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Lily. I am a mindset and resilience coach, and I work with people going through kind of tricky, turbulent times in life and hoping to empower them through that.
I'm actually really looking forward to this because I've had a
Oh,
couple of people
good.
that specialize in your area, and I'm always amazed by it because it really gets you to dive into some of the psyche around it. So, first thing I
Mm.
want to ask you is sort of how you ended up in where you are today and in the field that you're in today.
Yes, it's not somewhere I expected to be. I was really sick for quite a few years, really intensely chronically ill for 5 years, but it kind of built up, took some time to build up to that point. And once I started recovering and rebuilding my life after this illness, um, I had some coaching to help with that. And I was like, oh, this is really great. This is really great. I'm really enjoying this. And I had thought maybe about training as a therapist because I had a lot of really great mental health support when I was unwell. And therapy, it was amazing. It was really helpful. But what I love about coaching is that it's forward looking. So you help people move forward and out of this area. And I was like, this is fantastic. I'd love to do this. So I joined a course and here I am.
Love it. So, what made you think
Yes.
of specializing in resilience? Because as I say, it's quite a
Mm,
unique thing of to specialize in because it's something that people don't actually think. Or from my assumptions, is not an
mm.
area that someone would assume that they need support in. So, what made you want to
Yes.
specialize in that area?
For me, I really wanted to give some sort of meaning and purpose to my time being so unwell and having such a hard time. Within that time frame, I also lost a few pregnancies and they've had experienced family breakdown, and it was just this very stressful, difficult time. And I, humans are purpose-seeking beings. I think I wanted to be able to use that in a way that could really help people and kind of make some sense of that experience for myself as well.
I can imagine from what you've just said as well. There's like quite a
Mm,
lot of your story that has impacted you and led you to where you are
mm,
today. So what, guys, obviously from the little pieces you've given us there,
yeah.
the obviously the level of resilience you're going to have to show to
Mm.
get through that, I can imagine has a massive impact. So how much did that impact your decision and your journey to going into coaching?
Yeah, hugely. And I think as well, I think certainly my idea around what resilience is has changed massively from that experience. Like, I don't know what you think of, but if I was to say, like, what do you think of when you think of a resilient person? You might think of like the rock hanging from a helicopter, or like, when I haven't seen the movie, but when Leonardo DiCaprio like drags his like half broken body through the snow for 2 hours, that movie that's, yeah, you kind of
I can't, yeah, I know the
we
one.
yeah, we kind of think of like emotional versions of that, this like gripping on and hanging on for kind of dear life. And I found, and what I find with my clients as well, that actually that's not what resilience is. It's kind of meeting ourselves where we're at, looking after ourselves, doing all the nervous system regulation work, working with our brain who's freaking out through all of this stuff. And the harder we push, the worse the freak out gets.
Yeah.
And so through this experience and learning actually how the brain works through some of the more hardest seasons of life was just really fascinating to me.
I think what's really nice there, I pulled on a thread where one of the conversations I had with a friend that he had with his therapist was you can't always be 100% because then you've got nowhere to go.
Yes,
So that
exactly.
idea of constantly working at around 80 to 70, at
Mm.
least when you need to shift up and go into that gear, you can. And it's kind of that, from what I'm getting, is that kind of theory of you've just got to be nice to yourself and not expect yourself to be able to do it. Because as you say, I think the stereotype of resilience is just keep going, just keep pushing. Particularly as they coming from a sports background and like a
Yes.
para sport background, that is very much drilled into you of just keep going, push through the
Mm.
pain, just keep pushing. When actually, it's not great advice for life. It works in
No.
short stints,
Yeah.
but not great advice for life.
No, no, and probably contributing to our, you know, society-wide huge levels of burnout and chronic disease and all sorts of things that's coming from that.
Do you think as well we're moving to a point? Because I think as well, I've had a lot of conversations around like toxic productivity and
Mm,
the capitalist situation we're in at the moment. Now, I've always been very clear. I don't. Capitalism is a weird thing, and I don't know where I fully sit with it. But I think
mm,
in terms of the workaholicism that we're seeing, particularly, I often say the shift between South and North perspective in the UK is absolutely crazy. And the way I always sum it up is I come from just outside London, and it's like everyone's got somewhere to be, everyone's super busy, everyone stressed out of their eyeballs. As soon as you go slightly north, that pressure just slowly gets less and less as a as a general rule of thumb. Obviously, there's individuals there that will be that level stress, but I just find it so interesting. What are you seeing as trends with clients that are coming to you with? I can imagine it's the question of resilience and then also the question of balancing their burnout and balancing their work life, because I think the
mm.
two kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I see that a lot with, we often wear the badge busy. It's like the term busy is like a badge of honor, like a medal, like, oh yeah, no, life's great. It's so busy and I'm doing this. And then when we need to take that time out for ourselves, even some of my clients who are really quite sick because of it, they feel so guilty, like they haven't done enough to deserve the rest. They have to prove it. And that's quite a common theme that I see.
It's really interesting because I think I've said this one before on the pod. I am the biggest one of that. Like my thing, obviously, doing as many projects as I do, my worst thing is anything that I find to decompress. My brain will be going to me, yeah, but you should really be working on that thing that you said you'd be working on. But no, you're sat here doing this thing that's probably a complete waste of time. And it's so interesting because you'll be a better judge of this than me. I definitely don't think I'm the only one that has that thought process of that
Gosh, no.
chronic. I think chronic, like, not, I don't want to use the word entrepreneur because it makes you feel weird, but like that chronic, like, got to be doing, because that's what life and success is portrayed to everyone. You kind
Mm.
of get stuck in that bubble.
Yes. Yeah. And then it seems like for some reason that bubble is tied to our sense of self-worth and it becomes an identity problem. So then the idea of taking a break from that is like cataclysmic to us because it shakes the very core of who we are.
It's also like, I think so many of us rely on work for our identity. I
Mm.
remember I've said on this podcast, a guest pointed out that our first introductions as Brits to anyone is always, "What do you do?" That's always it's always the first thing we ask.
Yeah.
And like, why? Why is everything revolve around what we do for work? It can be, what are your main interests? How are you doing today? It's always,
Mm.
so what do you do for work?
Yes, yeah. And when I was really sick and the worst times of my illness, I wasn't able to work. And that was a real struggle for me. Like I spent a lot of therapy hours dealing with that and I should have just been resting, which is
Yeah,
what my body needed to do. And when I went to social gatherings because of that, I started asking people how do you spend your time?
that's a great way to frame it. How do you spend your time? Or just even as well, asking someone just how they are.
Mm, yeah.
I think that one, if you ask that straight off the bat, people don't know how to react to it because they're not used to it. They're like, wait, what?
Yeah, you're
This isn't
short
social
circuiting
norm.
that small talk circuit.
It's weird. It's almost like we default to it. But what are you seeing in terms of with clients? Are you seeing that there's a certain age group? Because obviously we've spoken there quite a lot about impacting people in their working lives, and particularly in the work culture that we have at the moment. Is there any trends that you're seeing with like the age of clients that are coming to you or specific industries they're working in? I'm just intrigued as well because I think whenever we talk of success, that is then has the connotation as well that someone is pushing beyond their limits.
Mm.
And I'm just intrigued to see if you're seeing any trends.
Not in terms of age group. No, my clients range in age, not hugely. I'd say the eldest is probably in her 60s and the youngest is early 20s. And it's I think harder situations or pain or suffering, whatever you want to call it, is a great leveler. It can come to anyone at any time in life. And so I do see that across the board. I primarily work with women. We can read into that, whatever we read into, maybe, because I'm a woman,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
who's interested in working with me. But I've worked with a whole diverse of people and backgrounds. And that was one thing as well that people used to say to me all the time when I was really sick, but you're so young. You're so young. First, I had my first migraine when I was 19, and I ended up resigning from my job and having to go on serious long-term leave at 27. And it's also heartbreaking when someone says that to you, like, yeah, I know, my whole life is over. Thanks for that.
It's really like as well. I think the hardest thing with that as a young person in the 20s, I can imagine it's that whole thing of work is so, as we've already said, work is so much of your identity. So then when that gets taken away from you, and particularly with everything going on in the world at the moment with anyone that faces chronic illness or any invisible disability, you naturally have this like, ah, so now I'm just not contributing to society at all, and I'm just this entity that's here, and then trying to rationalize that in your head when actually that is just the bullshit that the world's telling you. uh,
Absolutely.
it's a really, I mean, I'd say not been in that situation, but having seen friends go through it, it's just got to be so hard. And then obviously that's when you come in and help guide someone through the process. But I think, how has your journey changed over time in terms of obviously you've gone on your own healing journey, and then obviously that's, I'd imagine, then impacted the way you practice.
Yes, hugely. It's kind of, I guess, fundamental to how I practice, and it's what took me into the profession in the first place. I think for me, when I was really unwell, my mindset made such a difference, and I just didn't think that that would be the case. I spent so long kind of just fobbing off and pushing it away, like, no, 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 my life will be better when the pain is gone. Nothing outside of the pain going, nothing can help with that. And when I started to then explore this, and I talk a lot about this idea of joy and sorrow coexisting, because we tend to be quite black and white and quite binary with our thinking. And actually, if you can make space for those little bits of joy, even in those really tough, sorrowful times, it can really help. And that was kind of like a chink in the armor, as it were, to start
Yeah.
unraveling this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's almost like breaking a sort of a cycle of giving yourself those little bits to help you sort of break out of the whirlwind that you're in. Because I
Mm,
think as well, when you're in such a negative space, it becomes this like echo chamber that you can't think of anything
yeah.
else. Or maybe
Yeah.
that's just my obsessive personality. But yeah, I think it's really interesting because so many people go through this, but not as many will speak about it. Because I think
No.
it's interesting how much impact our everything has, because when I say separates the two of like personal life and work, the two can't. Yeah, they're definitely two things, and
Mm,
it definitely got to be a congruent image rather than they are separate. Because I don't, I don't believe in the thing of you leave work, you leave life at home, and then you go to work, and then work
mm.
and life are completely different. It just doesn't work, and I think in terms of looking after yourself, it's not, it's just not helpful, and I don't know how we change it. From your perspective, obviously I'd imagine a number of people come to you and the start of their journeys around their professional situation, and how do we change the way the UK works in terms of their working culture, because I think that's the
Wow.
biggest issue.
That
That's
is.
a, and it's a big question, and it's more to open the discussion for the two of us, because I think that is a big part of the problem. I mean, we're seeing issues with the DWP with their PIP service at the moment, and that causing issues with the new legislation that's been brought in. And then there is also the cultural problem that we have within the UK towards working. And I say this as someone that is, I say, a busybody, always doing something, always building something. So I am the biggest hypocrite And I know all this information and I know it's not the best way to do things, but I'm just intrigued from your perspective as someone that constantly speaks to people in those situations where they feel stuck. How do you think we change things?
So it's not workplace specific, but I think one of the most helpful things would be for us as a culture to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable. You know, when you talk about kind of toxic productivity, the other thing is toxic positivity as well. When someone opens up about finding something difficult, they're immediately so often met with, and I say this, that people have good intentions. It's not that they're, doing something evil, but they say like, oh, at least X, Y, and Z. At least, someone has it worse than you. There's always a silver lining. Or my personal hated one is everything happens for a reason.
Oh yeah, we love that one. That one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, it doesn't. That, and my personal theory on this is that we say these things because we don't know what to say. And we are uncomfortable with just, we feel like we have to fix the situation when actually, most of the time, what people need is they just need to be witnessed in this circumstance. And being able to provide that space for them would do wonders. And if we could learn to somehow become more comfortable with that kind of like awkward, difficult conversation.
Yeah, I think it's almost that theory that Simon Sinek uses of that theory of sitting in the mud and just going, yeah,
Mm,
this situation is shit. Let's just
yeah.
sit in it for a bit, and if you need to talk about it, let's talk about it rather than and going, oh, I have a solution for you, or as you say, that whole thing of oh, someone's got it worse than you, because I think I am definitely fit the stereotypical male thing of like we have that autopilot must fix. So like
Yes.
someone will come to me with a problem, my automatic default is, okay, I'm going to help you fix that problem rather than sit and actually listen. And I'm actively trying to use that a lot more in terms of just someone being able to vent to you and go, this is a really rubbish situation. I don't need you to answer it for me. I just need you to just sit there and at least say it out loud to someone. And I think that's a tricky thing to master. And then just coming on to the second point of people going, oh, someone else has got it worse than you. I'll give you an example that I always use with friends whenever the topic comes up of mental health. Because someone goes like, oh, I don't know. I've had this happen. I don't understand why Charlie's struggling with this. Mine's far worse. It's almost the disability top trumps situation we also find ourselves in. Uh,
Sure.
and what I always say is people only understand the pain that they've been exposed to. So if something is someone else's 100%, and that's the max that they can take, that is going to impact them the same way your 100%, which you're considering is their 150%,
Mm,
is going to impact you because people only know what they're exposed to. So they can only cope with what they're exposed to. So therefore, to say that someone's experience is worse or better than yours
yeah.
doesn't count.
No,
Because if
it
I
doesn't.
say to you, I've been going to the gym for a number of years and I can lift 60, 70 kilos. But then if someone else can only lift 5, but that's their maximum that they can lift, they're working just as hard as me. It's not that it's my biggest frustration whenever the topic of like mental health and being a supportive community comes up. It's that whole thing of someone else has got it worse than you. And actually that whole concept in itself doesn't exist. Also, why are we comparing who's got it worse? No one wants
Right.
worse. So let's
No,
let's not talk about like
no.
why have we got to use it as a comparison?
Yeah. And then on the flip side, I used to get a lot like, oh gosh, I don't know how you do it. And it's like, oh, thanks. Thanks. My situation is so shit that it's just it's really tricky. This like comparison. It's like, no, we're all struggling. We all have our shit. Like, why can't we just hold space for that?
100%. And it's
Mm.
instead of just being a more compassionate
Yes.
race, really, we just need to be more compassionate and more understanding. And I think it's a hard one because I can hear the 50-year-old men and women going, "Oh, it's snowflake culture," and It's not. It's more just look. We want to make things better at the end of the day. I'm a strong believer of look. What happened in the past happened, but that doesn't mean we can't make things better. And I think if we just move forward, but I just, yeah, I think so much of my world, I always end up looking at the professional side of things and I just sit there thinking, I don't know how we get everyone to buy into this, short of shipping everyone off to Norway and going, look, see, if everyone's nice to each other and we do less, like, work is less of a problem, this all goes away.
Yes, exactly. Let's all go and copy the Scandies.
Yeah. um, and then what about when it comes to your work? What kind of people do you often work with? Like, what is your main clientele? Obviously, we've spoken a lot about people that are struggling in their professional lives, people that are struggling with their mental health. What are you seeing as the main people that are coming to you with it? Because as well, as I mentioned earlier, a resilience coach is a usually one people would automatically go to and Google. Certainly, for
Mm.
me, until I started doing this role, it wasn't something I was exposed to. So, what are you seeing as sort of your main client base?
I am seeing it's mainly people who are going through a big change, or season of upheaval that's causing them to need to reprioritize. And maybe there's a sense of loss of identity within that, like with the professional life. And often it's usually something that isn't their choice, whether that's kind of illness, redundancy, bereavement. Um, and they feel overwhelmed and stuck trying to move through that and having a hard time envisioning what life could look like on the other side of it.
That's really interesting because I'm sitting there looking at it myself and going, "It sounds like me." I think as well, it's that whole thing of whenever you go through a difficult, challenging period, it's so hard to see the other side of it.
It
And I
can be
think
all encompassing.
yeah. How do you start that journey with clients? So I'm thinking for our listeners, if they're going through it and they're at the beginning stages, what's some advice that you could give in terms of helping them sort of uncover that there is a light at the end of the tunnel
Yeah.
and things might be different, but it might also be different for the better.
Yes. Okay. First thing, I mean, there's so many places we could start with that, but I think kind of as a general piece of advice is when something goes wrong or something happens to us, we often automatically associate it with something is wrong with us. Like, I am broken. I need fixing. It's what the personal development industry thrives off. It's what advertising thrives off. We are told all the time that we are broken and therefore we need fixing. And so just being able to recognize that this situation, these circumstances, they are not you. Like, yes, we have to deal with them, but ultimately at the end of the day, you are still you, and you had a life before this, you will have a life after this. And also the other thing that I say, and I say this as someone who spent a significant period of time in pain every second of every day. So this is like not a light and fluffy thing for me. In a lot of cases, all we have is the present moment. We tell us the past is all about, and it sounds quite, it sounds all very woo woo, but all we have is the present moment. The past is a story that we're telling ourselves. It's through our lens, it's through our interpretation and our biases and our beliefs and all of that. And the future, again, is something that our brain is trying to predict. It's not true, but we live in these narratives and these stories all the time where actually, if we can just remember who we are and living in this present moment, we can get through it, even if it's second by second.
That's really interesting because I'm relating that to myself because my natural instinct, and someone's pointed this out for me, is I'm always what's next.
Mm,
So I really struggle with that whole sit still and just exist. I
yes.
really struggle with that. And my thing is, what's next? Like, what are we going to do next? We've got to have. I think also in my context, I was saying this to a friend, I think that largely comes from it being with my disability and the situations that come with that. I'm constantly having to be in a mode of, right, what's the plan?
Mm,
What's the plan? Because I've got to think of my access needs, got to think of that. And I think that's where it comes from. But it's so interesting with what you just said of, obviously the past is the past. It's kind of this story that we're telling, but then the future hasn't happened yet. So we're just kind of here. But it's how do you how would I'm going to use myself as a real case.
Okay.
How would you work with someone like myself that is always like, okay, but next, or like, for example, like when I was going through it a couple of months ago, I really struggled with the whole thing of I'm so used to, I say, having a plan and knowing what to do next, and not being able to find a solution that fit. I really struggled with.
Mm.
So how would you work with someone in my situation?
Well, what we could do is we could the plan and needing to have a plan is um, catering to a need. So it's like, well, what is driving that need for a plan? Our brain's job is not to keep us happy; it's to keep us safe. And so that's what everything is filtered through: is this safe? Is this a threat, or is this safe? And it's that trying to keep you away from what it perceives as a threat. And of course, nowadays the threat is like a car alarm going off, or trying to cross a busy road, or an email from your boss that, had a slight change in punctuation. So are they mad at you? Rather than, this system worked really well when we were watching out for tigers in the bush over there, but it doesn't work very well now with all of these chronic micro stresses that we have. And so what we try and do is we try and control what we think we can control, what our brain, tries to control in order to try and keep us safe. So, what element of safety is that need of the plan? Um, what is it fulfilling? Because even if you think there's no benefit to it, when you dig a bit, there is a perceived benefit to everything we do, even if it's, I see a lot of clients there who all of us were incredibly mean to ourselves. We say horrible things to ourselves that we would never say to anyone else. And you say, okay, well, what benefits you if you keep speaking to yourself like this? And initially it's like, well, there's no benefit to it. And then you realize, oh, well, actually, it stops me from speaking out in a meeting. And when I was 5 years old, I was asked to read in class and I messed it up and they laughed at me. And so now if I don't
Yeah,
speak out in these
yeah,
meetings, I won't get laughed at, but also I will never get promoted or feel fulfilled at work. And so, do you see what I mean? Like, there's this whole system
yeah.
that's trying to keep us safe, but often it's just getting in the way and keeping us stuck.
It's really interesting. As I used myself as a real case there because
Mm.
I also, having gone through my own therapy sessions, I know what the issue is, and I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting because for me in that situation, it all comes down to like I operate from a very high level of anxiety
Mm.
permanently. And that's
Okay.
kind of where I sit, and it is so interesting to see how different people work. But I think you're completely right in the respect of the way in which we have to always have solutions rather than just sitting still is so powerful. But then it's still a skill that I'm yet to
Mm.
master.
Yeah,
And
it's
I think
really tough.
it does come from that whole chronic, like, must be achieving. I do think it comes from that.
Yeah. There's a really interesting kind of piece of research and theory from a neuroscientist called Dr. Jill Bottle Taylor. No, sorry, Jill Bolt Taylor. And it's that a emotion in our bodies that triggers, if you get angry and you feel your heart racing and your face flushing, triggers those physiological responses. That only lasts for 90 seconds before those chemicals are
Yeah.
completely gone from our body. And so anything that lasts longer than 90 seconds is because you're reactivating those feelings by telling yourself the story with it. And so if we allow ourselves that space to just be, to let the feelings flow through us. Emotional intelligence is a big part of my work. You let those feelings flow through you. You don't have to assign a narrative to everything. We're human beings, not human thinkings or human doings. We're human beings.
It's so true, and I think that assigning narrative
Mm.
is so interesting. Like I think Alex, the other resilience coach we've had on, mentioned the 90-second theory, and I think it's so interesting because when you're in that moment, you're like, yeah, it can't be a thing, and then you actually sit and think about it, and you're like, no, is my brain going, oh, but what if that happens again? What are you going to do in that situation? The other thing as well, I think I've got to the point with is I've started telling myself as well, this doesn't serve me. So
Mm.
like I sit there and go, right, okay, me getting anxious about a mistake that I've made, it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help me. It doesn't help the person that's got the problem. I need to just look at it and go, right, how do we fix this? Rather than focusing on the anxiety. But I think you end up stuck. And I think that's the difficult thing because we're all we're all in our own echo chamber because we're all often in a similar situation telling ourselves similar stories. So then everyone's doing the same thing and then it becomes a societal issue.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting observation, especially in, the word, echo chamber. It's exactly the same on social media as well. So it's not just in our brains and in, um, in real life social settings. We're now living in this world where it's thousands of people beamed into all these devices that live in our pockets all the time. And so it can be really hard to even imagine that there's a life that might be different and might be possible for you.
Especially as well because you're getting volume
Mm,
with social media as well. It's that whole thing of you'd in caveman times you'd probably interact with four people. You're now interacting with hundreds, if not thousands, of people at
yeah,
once, and then
absolutely.
it just becomes everything at once. And I think it's so hard because I think a lot of people, when they hear this conversation, will go, "It's quite a idealistic conversation."
Mm,
How, in terms of how does someone start changing the way they think in terms of because so you're not going to pick up this or practice straight
mm,
off the bat and run with it. And obviously, I'm not
mm.
saying for you, Lily, to give us a free therapy session, but I'm more meaning in terms of just some real world examples of how we can move this more into our day-to-day lives.
Yeah. The first step, and for a lot of people, this is the hardest step, is to be aware of it. Like, we don't know what we don't know, do we? So if there is a thinking pattern and a loop that you are doing and that is not serving you, or, you know, yeah, that's not serving you, is to become is to be aware of it. And then it's to be reassured, very, very reassured by the neuroscience that our brains are plastic. There used to be this theory that once we became adults, that was it. Our brains were set and we couldn't change them. And we are who we are. You can't teach an old dog new tricks type rhetoric. And that's just not true. Our brains are plastic, are malleable throughout our lives. And they learn through repetition. So we create these neural pathways. And the more we do something, the more ingrained it becomes. You can think of it like a path going through a wood. You've got these thick trees either side of you and all the bracken and stuff. And there's a really well trodden path. If you want to go slightly to the side, it's hard. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying it's easy. It's worthwhile, but it's not easy. And you might have to get the chainsaw out and the chipper and take down the trees and cut back the bracken and pull up the roots. But eventually, a path will start to form. And as you tread it more and more, that path will grow. And the path that was there before, that was so easy to walk down, so such an easy program for our brains to run, grows up. And it's the same in our brain. It literally withers away. And so be really reassured with that. And then, it's a case of maybe uncovering where these beliefs and these thought patterns have come from. Are they true? We can decide whether or not we want to keep them being true for us. And then what do we want to rewrite that with? And then practicing it and practice living that. And it is that flipping the switch of, moving from like, I dropped a glass, let's say, like, Lily, you're so stupid, blah, berating myself, running this automatic path where I'm awful to myself, just as an example. And it's like, okay, I notice that I'm doing that. I know that this isn't helpful for me or true. Like, just because I dropped a glass doesn't make me an idiot or an awful person. And it's like, okay, well, what would I say to a child? What would I say to my best friend? It's like, it's okay. We can get a new glass. We can clean it up. And that's really hard. And it feels really awkward and really uncomfortable when you first do it. And that's just because you haven't practiced it. And so it is just a
Yeah.
case of practicing it.
It just reminds me of so one piece of advice my dad always gives is always look at something and something that went wrong and goes, did anyone die? No.
Yes.
then it's not a problem. Like
Yeah.
anything can be fixed. Obviously, death is fairly finite and final. And it's so interesting because you're so right in terms of the way we talk to ourselves. It's like, oh, you're an idiot. Like one of mine that I battled with since I was young is being dyslexic around like any typos and stuff is like a severe level of anxiety. So if anyone ever finds typos in the stuff that I do, it's like you're basically punching me in the face.
Mm.
And it's really tricky to try and change the narrative to this is a difficulty I have. It is what it is. I'm never going to be able to catch everything. But then even someone without it isn't. And it's the way we talk to ourselves. When you actually think about it, it's crazy. Is that
It is.
actually crazy? And then I think as well, when you go down the route of there are some people in the world that are extreme with some of these things, then you're getting the outside world reaffirming
Mm.
some of those situations, and it
Yeah.
can be really tricky.
Yeah, it can be really tricky. And also our brain our subconscious doesn't understand the difference between what is real and what we're telling it, whether we're visualizing something or imagining something, which means is a great hack to visualize how you want to be. But also when you're playing out those worst case scenarios and, the person, I'm also severely dyslexic, so I really sympathize, the person who thinks I'm an absolute moron or whatever for the typo in my email, all of those things, our brain doesn't know which one of those are true and which ones aren't. And it perceives the threat that it perceives when we beat ourselves up is the same as if someone externally was saying that to us. And so by activating that threat response, we're then activating that nervous system. Our brain is not going to be operating in its most helpful peak way because it literally shuts down executive function when we're in this threat state. And so just, it does all sound very idealistic, but once you start unpicking it and learning it and being like, okay, how can I be a safe place for myself? It does start to untangle this mess that we find ourselves in often.
What about in terms of, like you mentioned there, obviously, that when someone's in a heightened level of stress,
Mm.
they're obviously not thinking the way they normally would. And
Yeah.
then maintaining a new practice in that mode, when you're in that mode of shit, something's gone wrong, I'm a terrible person, it's
Mm.
really hard to then remember the new narrative you're telling yourself, the work that you've done in your therapy sessions and the work you've done in your coaching sessions to then go, right, I need to go down this path rather than my usual. How do you guide clients through, because I know myself, let's say trying to change a habit is hard anyway.
Mm.
Trying to change a habit when it's a habit that when parts of your brain are focusing on other stuff because you're trying to beat yourself up is a very difficult thing to
Yeah.
do.
It is. It is very difficult. And so, firstly, you need to be okay with missing it in the moment initially, because that's not going to come straight away. It's not. It's just not, because that's, like you say, certain parts of our brain are offline. And so, once you are re-regulated, and you can do lots of different grounding practices and exercises and breathing exercises to help with that. A lovely one that I learned just recently is called havening, when you stroke just from your shoulders down to your elbows like that. And there's bilateral tapping. So like you don't need anything fancy. You can just do it wherever you are. And calming yourself down, taking yourself out of that threat response. So those higher levels of executive function come back online, and you will get better at it. And so when you get better at it and as you practice it, you will start to be able to do it in those moments. And again, that's something that this 90-second rule is really helpful with, is you wait for that initial reactivity to go and then respond
Yeah.
once all of those chemicals are out of your system.
It's almost giving out like I'm also seeing it as almost, like when you say to yourself, I'm not going to respond to this message or email because I know I'm responding from a place of like
Mm.
anger and frustration. It's almost giving your body that time of going, right, we're going to feel this. And
Mm-hmm.
this just is what it is. And then we're going to deal with the fallout afterwards because we're actually going to be able to be more successful with how we go about moving forward rather than reacting in the moment. That was just what my brain did. It was like, actually, it's like when you go to respond to that gut instinct email and want to tear someone apart, but actually you got to go, right, just breathe, walk away, come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really tricky because that wanting to tear apart someone, feeling obviously it's like instinctive, it's survival, and it's quite satisfying as well
Yeah.
when you're like, oh yeah, I got them really good in that
Yeah.
reply. But what's it gonna
It's not
be
going to
like
benefit
down
anyone.
no. And it's interesting what you're saying about with your dad. Well, did anyone die? The another one that's quite helpful to add some perspective is like, well, will this matter in 5 minutes? Will this matter in 5 days? Will this matter in 5 months? Will this matter in 5 years? And it's like, it's not going to matter in 5 years. Like, yes, it's annoying, it's frustrating, it's difficult. I'm not taking away from that. But ultimately, no one's going to die.
It's also that I always try and remember a piece of advice an old manager gave me when I first started working, which was, I don't care if you mess up. What I care about is if you don't tell me, because then I can't help you fix it.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's a thing that we can sort of relay to ourselves in terms of like, stuff happened and you can get very caught up in thinking, oh no, the world's ending. When actually, okay, an email went to, okay, we'll use the dyslexic example. There was a ton of typos in an email I sent. Someone's going to probably look at that and either they're going to chuckle, go, what the hell happened here? Or they're going to, for 5 seconds, think, oh, Charlie's a bit of an idiot. Like, I can deal with that. I can deal with Charlie's a bit of an idiot. That's fine. Because at the end of the day, it's one situation. And I think it's that, like we said earlier, of allowing yourself to just be in the moment, like in terms of just allow yourself to make mistakes. And if you can take that approach, it's going to relieve so much pressure.
It is. It is. And also, I was talking with a client about this yesterday. We have a negativity bias. So everything that is negative, we remember and we focus on and gets our attention so much easier than anything that is positive. So,
So true. Yeah.
so you've probably sent thousands of emails that were absolutely fine and didn't have any typos in. But because of your dyslexia and your experiences there, your brain's like, to keep you safe, I must not make a typo because you remember and give more weight to those, not you, but like one,
Yeah.
we all
Yeah.
do, take we heed the negative experiences so much more than the positive ones. And so these lenses that we experience the world through aren't even true because they are a tiny proportion of our experiences that our brains kind of latch onto.
It's so true because I compare that to what I often talk about within the disabled community and particularly around the social media world that is in terms of like the negativity is what you always see. So it'll always be the 6 or 7, and I use the damaged mobility equipment flight example. So there'll be I'm going to downscale this because I don't actually know the figures, but say there's 10 times when someone gets their chair damaged. No one talks about the thousands of other flights that have taken place. Nothing's happened. Everything's fine. But because that's not interesting to our brains of going, oh, something went wrong here. And we can almost poke holes in someone else's problem, and that's what it always feels like. It's hard because I fall into it as well. Of like something will go, you'll see something go wrong, and you go, "Bloody hell! That like, how did this happen?" And you end up in a scroll hole of figuring out how it happened.
Yeah.
But then no one talks about the massive positives of all the other times that none of these problems happened because we all lean towards the negativity.
Yeah, it's true. And it's then we live in a society that what's the right word? Maybe takes advantage of that with clickbait and headlines
Yeah.
and stuff. That's what sells. That's what
Yeah.
we're interested in because in some perverse way we think it's going to keep us safe. And it's partly my theory as to why like true crime podcasts, like why do we want to sit around listening to grisly details of how people were murdered? And it's
Yeah.
because we think somehow it's going to maybe keep us safe.
It's also, I think there's an element of like intrigue with stuff like with
Yes,
everything. It's like
also that.
it's kind of that dopamine of like, oh, what happened here? How did this happen? Because as soon as you see something where the title grabs you, you're like, oh, but then it's again, it's always kind of has that negative connotation of like, if again, I'll use a football example, someone wins a trophy, a football team wins a trophy, that will stay in my brain for, 2 seconds. Whereas if someone horrifically breaks their leg in three places, that I'll be talking about for about a week.
Yeah, that's so true.
It's it's so strange that the human brain, the way it's wired at the moment, is so strange, and I don't know how we change it. I don't know how, particularly from like a wider point of view of how we
Mm,
like change the world. This is a very big hypothetical, but to a more positive place of like we focus on the positives rather than the negatives. But then
mm.
I don't know if we ever will.
I would love that. I don't know if we ever will either. You've kind of floored me slightly because it would be lovely, but I don't know how we ever will. I think by us all doing our bit with our own brains, maybe we'll create that ripple effect, certainly within our own communities. And I think, social media gets a lot of stick, and rightfully so. And it also is incredibly helpful at sharing this sort of information, just like we are doing on this podcast. And there is part of me, maybe naively, that does kind of hope that those little moments could build up into something bigger on a kind of more societal global
The
level.
way I look at it is like people always ask me, like obviously doing a lot of working in the disabled space, everyone goes, "Oh, do you ever think we're going to get to a point where like the whole disability issue is no longer an issue?" And I hate
Mm,
saying it, and I'm like, no, not in my lifetime. It's
no.
always going to be a thing because people
Mm,
will have their viewpoints that they're not willing to change. But then my view on it is, as long as I can make a dent or improve people's lives in some respects, then
yeah,
I'm happy to take that. And I think it's that whole thing of compounding interest, and compounding wins of,
yeah,
if we can get 20 people to make that difference, the impact will be huge. And you've just got to happily go with that. Because again, if you get too caught up in the negative loop of, well, I'm not going to make a difference, you're going to damage your own mental health.
yeah.
It's taking you down the same path that you went down before. You got to
Yes,
change the way you
exactly.
think a little bit and go
Mm,
down a more positive route, and
yeah,
be kinder to yourself and say, "Well, I've done my bit," and that's kind of how to do it. But we've
yeah,
spoken a lot about someone struggling with their mental health and managing that, and you speak quite a lot about, well, being emotionally stretched. What
yes.
does being emotionally stretched mean in real life terms? Obviously, people can get their own assumptions with it, but in terms of the work you do, what does that mean?
So I think that you're right. We are very emotionally stretched. And it kind of comes back to that idea of, I think we are sold a lie when it comes to what is resilience. And it is this, like, hustling through, like it's kind of a slightly strange cousin of hustle culture with our own
Yeah.
with our
Yeah.
own resilience. And I think that we have not have to. What I would hope that we could get to a point is that we understand that emotions are part of being human, and they're not something that need fixing. Like maybe the situation that's causing them needs fixing. They're not something that is helpful to repress or ignore. And being able to create a way of being more emotionally intelligent could, I hope, be rather helpful. And part of my theory is that part of my theory, like saying I'm a scientist, part of my kind of hope is that, or my thinking is that we have more control over how we feel in our lived day-to-day experiences than we're often taught or led to believe. I think a lot of us believe that we are totally at the whim of the situations that often happen to us that we don't necessarily go out and cause. And that's very disempowering. And I'm not entirely sure it's true. And whilst of course those situations are going to have an impact on us and impact how we feel in the day-to-day moment, actually there are some really very simple tools that we've been talking about and research that shows that actually in the day-to-day, moment by moment lived experiences, that is just a jumble of stuff in our heads at the end of the day,
Yeah, yeah,
we actually have some control over how we feel with that. And that, I hope, is a really empowering and hopeful message.
definitely. And I think as well, is that whole thing of realizing that you have the power to give other stuff the power. So, like,
Yes.
by that, what I mean is like, will use the work example again. People get in a situation where work is everything. If they make a mistake, it's the world ending. When actually, if you can actually get to a point where you zoom out and go, well, it was a bit shit today. This and this went wrong. But do you know what? It went wrong. We fixed it as best we could. We came out the other side, and now I'm back home in a completely different environment, doing a completely different thing. They are two separate entities. I'm allowed to enjoy one, and one doesn't have to impact the other. And I think that compartmentalizing is really hard to do in terms of or to successfully do it in terms of you being able to enjoy it and just feel the emotions that you have rather than relating them together. It's that whole mentality of I've had a shit day at work, so now my whole day is going to be shit.
Yes.
And that is
Yeah.
a really hard thing to master. Again,
Mm.
guilty is charged.
Yeah.
I've like,
We've all been there.
yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's been there, but I think getting to that point of, I say, just being kind to yourself and going, look, I'm going to close the door on this chapter for today, and I'm going to come back to it fresh tomorrow, rather than putting yourself in that mental loop of, oh, that was shit, and now that's just the loop that you hear throughout the day. And I think again, it's that one thing I'd imagine you get a lot with clients is I can't seem to, something will happen in their life and then they can't seem to shake that when they then go to sleep. So then there's that constant loop of you're replaying the scenarios.
Yeah.
And I imagine that comes up quite a lot in conversations of how do I get to a point where that doesn't happen anymore. That's again a massive assumption and very out of the blue, but it's very interesting that I think so many people find themselves in that situation where one thing will impact their whole day all the way through to when they're trying to sleep.
Yeah, I do see that. I do see that a lot. And I've also been, and sometimes still am, very much that person. Took me a very long time to get to sleep last night, as an example. But it is thankfully becoming less and less. And a couple of things. One thing that I used to think or have the mindset that if my day went wrong or something that happened, that's the whole day written off. And I couldn't start again until the next day. I needed to go to sleep. I don't know where it came from, but actually, we can, like you say, close the door on that chapter. We can hit reset at any point in the day, whether it's just going and having a cup of tea and being like, okay, when I walk back out this door, this is a new section of my day. For me personally, and also with some of my clients, like journaling is really helpful. Just having a chance to, I like to say it like emptying my brain, where it's really chatty and going through all of these things. Like it just almost needs to play out the scenario. And by having it exist somewhere else other than your head, even if it's just in a notebook, is really helpful. And it's interesting. I had a colleague who I trained with the other day was saying that she always really hated journaling because her brain was too fast. Her hand couldn't keep up. And then she realized that's the point. It forces you to slow down so you can actually put the time in of kind of working out, what does this really mean? What am I really trying to say here? And being more purposeful over which path you choose in that word, rather than just letting your brain run and spiral on the one that it's used to.
The way I often describe it is, I think I've had this conversation before, and people find this analogy hilarious. But for anyone that ever played on the Nintendo Wii back years ago,
Yes.
does anyone remember the little characters that basically you'd build on the main screen, and if they hit the wall, they'd run and go in another direction? that is the inside of my brain when I'm trying to solve a problem.
Mm,
So this is what I say when we're talking about staying awake overnight and trying to sort of realize that you're not serving yourself by overthinking a situation, whether that be because of a stress at work or you're trying to solve a problem. That is so hard to solve, and the way I've had to go around it is almost that thing of, again, telling myself this it doesn't serve me now. So if I don't let this go and think about it tomorrow, I'm then going to be shattered thinking about this tomorrow and still not be any further along than I actually wanted to be. And
yeah.
I think it's so interesting. I think we're in a world where overthinking is just chronic.
Yes.
It's chronic. I am guilty as charged, exactly the same. And I think the skills we've shared today, hopefully, will sort of give people a little bit of a way out. And I
Yeah.
think, is there anything else you would say on in the terms of overthinking? Because I was going to say, I know you said that part of it's that your colleague struggled with the speed of writing, but I again have always struggled with the idea of journaling. It's not been a process that I've enjoyed. I don't know what it is. I just can't do it. My partner loves it. I can't stand it.
So, I mean, what, like, I guess I would, if we were in a session, it's like, okay, well, what in the past has helped you to do that? Because we do all have our own things.
So
And
the way I do it, which is going to sound really weird, and you're probably going to
mm,
go, "That's not helpful." So the way
well,
I've found
can't
worked
judge.
is active. So I call it my active. What was it? Active meditation, where basically so I'd spent a long time when I was younger swimming. So for me, swimming is very much an autopilot. I can literally
Mm,
go into the motions. My brain, physically, my brain switches off in terms of it knows what it's doing. It just go through that. So then I'll spend that time running through a process. But because I'm not trying to do 200 things at once. This sounds really weird because I am doing something, but because I've got that active distraction, I then often find once I finish a session, I will then go, I think I've either solved the problem or
yeah.
I've realized it's not that deep and I need to just let it go.
And that, again, from a physiological level is really helpful because then you also have the endorphins and change of scenery, doing something out of your kind of usual routine. It's all really helpful. So, like, you obviously can't swim in your bedroom
Yeah.
if you're trying to
Yeah.
get to sleep, which is why journaling or something like that can be helpful, or other exercises to help that mind calm down when it's bouncing off the walls. I um I was taught how to do. I was taught to do this as a child, but I like imagine go through every part of my body, starting at my toes, working up to my head, and just imagining it sinking into the mattress and focusing on the feeling of the mattress. And so when my brain goes like spinning off in one direction, it gives you something to bring it back to rather than being like, no, I'm not going to think of that. Because then it just turns into the spiral of, oh no, I mustn't think about that. But so if we have another activity to do, and there are lots of activities, like one that is supposed to be very good is you think of a word, say sheep. I think I'm thinking of counting sheep. And then you have to list as many words as you can beginning with S, and then as many words as you can begin with H. And you go through all the letters of the words. And it's to do with the way it interrupts your normal thinking pattern in your
Pattern.
brain.
Yeah.
So that might be something to try if it's the middle of the night and you can't get to the pool.
And then the other thing I often do is I then force myself to think of a core, like, say core memory. I'm just going to use that because it's the best way I could describe it. But I literally just sit there and go, right, let's pick a core memory and let's just focus on running through that process of like what happened in that core memory, because it's not something that my biggest problem is my brain goes into fix. So I
Yeah.
have to try and fix a problem. So if I can give it
Mhm.
something where you don't have to fix about this, your job is to purely think about this, then
Yeah.
oftentimes so I'll like, be able to drop off. But I think it's so interesting how much we are overthinking. I just see it getting worse. And I say
Mm.
it's that as someone who is a chronic overthinker.
Yeah. And the thing is, when you talk about those like core memories, those positive memories, when you don't have to fix something, like we talked about earlier, when your brain doesn't know the difference between what's happening now and what you're thinking about and those stories you're telling itself, by thinking of more positive scenarios, visualizing positive scenarios, you activate this thing called the positive emotions attractor in your brain. And so, just like we were saying before about how you get all the like negative effects of chemicals moving through your body when you're thinking of something unhelpful or bad, it's the opposite. When you think, you get all the good feelings as well, which is going to help calm your body and relax you, so you are more likely to drop off. So I can really see how that would work.
It's a really weird thing. Honestly, it's because I've spent so many years struggling with sleep. I always have.
Mm.
I always say it's a running meme, but I always say there's one in every relationship. There's always one that goes to sleep in seconds,
Yeah.
and then there's always one that's just the one that's laying there awake, going, "Don't know why I can't drop off, but I'm here now."
Yeah. And then in my case, if your partner snores, then it's like, oh, well, now I'm getting really annoyed because you're
Yeah,
snoring.
yeah. Or my thing is as a someone who runs hot when they sleep. If I don't get a sleep quick enough, my body temperature just goes sky high, and then I
Right.
can't bring it back down. And then
Mm.
it's an endless game with me. I'm not necessarily. I love how I'm sharing all of this on the podcast, but there you go. But before we finish up, I want to ask you the last question that I ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree?
I'm going to go in both directions here. Um, so maybe it's a middle ground. I don't know. Firstly, I really agree with the intention and the ethos of political correctness in terms of not wanting to offend or exclude or other someone else, to make the world as accessible and kind and generous as possible. But then on the flip side, you have the fact that it is often weaponized, I think.
Yep. Yep.
And even like saying this out loud, like I'm getting nervous saying this because I'm like, oh my gosh, who's going to come for me in the comments section, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think that's helpful or really in the spirit of how it was intended.
Yeah, and I completely agree. So the whole reason my brand was started as
Mm.
not quite politically correct was all around the fact that I hated the hesitation whenever someone had a question around my disability. I hated it because I was like, look, like at the end of the day, you're going to ask the questions that you want to ask, and there's nothing wrong with that because that's how you learn.
Mm.
And I think I always struggled with the whole idea of, but we shouldn't have to be society's answer. And I'm like, but then how are we supposed to grow if we can't give them the answer? So to give a real world example, we're arguing that whenever we talk about um disability and things that impact disability, there needs to be someone with a disability present at the table, without us openly saying, right, well, if I get asked questions about my disability 9 times out of 10, I'm going to answer it. We aren't being part of that problem, because then someone without lived experience is then going to answer the question for us, thus meaning that the idea, like, it's like Chinese whispers. They're not actually going to get the authentic answer. And I think so. My thing with political correctness is more so to get rid of the hesitation of allowing people not to understand a certain topic. So
Yeah.
not to understand, as a white ginger male, I don't have an in-depth understanding of what it's like to be a person of color. So I'll naturally be more inquisitive when I meet someone who is a person of color, because I want to understand it and I want to learn it, because that is my nature. Because I'm like, at least if I can gain an understanding of a situation, I know also what the landmines are going to be. Whereas if you don't ask that question, and I think that's the issue we've got with politically correctness being so, it was more of that hesitation. So I think that's more of my issue with it, is that hesitation of not wanting to say the wrong thing. Whereas I say several times on this podcast, allow people to make mistakes, because that's how we learn and that's how we grow. So if someone uses the wrong term, it's okay. And I think, like, what, again, another example that I often use is, in the UK, we don't really use the word handicapped. If you use the word handicapped in our context, it's like, ugh, what are you
Yes.
using that word for?
Yeah.
Whereas obviously over in the States, it's very much a used term.
Mm.
So then it's just about understanding how those things work. So I've gone on a very big tangent and I apologize,
No,
Lily, but
that's
I think
fine.
it's a really interesting one because whenever someone brings up the topic of politically correctness, I feel like I have to have a really strong
Mm.
reason behind like why I am or why my brand is what it is. But I think it all just comes down to that whole thing of we just need to allow people to make mistakes and also not take things to extremes. Because I think,
Yeah.
like you say, there's value in being politically correct in terms of not wanting to offend someone and just being generally a good person, because that's
Mm.
what we're all talking about really here.
Yeah.
But then also, if you go too far the other way of being not politically correct, then it goes into being horrible, being a narcissist, being all of those things. So I think it's just finding the happy medium, and I think we've lost that art of the medium ground. We've either got to be one camp or the other. We've got to be in. You've got to be in or you're out, and
Yeah.
it's such a strange thing because I think it plays into so many things. That whole culture of are you in or are you out, rather than we just disagree on this point, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We've lost the nuance. And I think as well, like increasingly with the online world, you can't fit nuance into little captions.
No,
But
it,
I think, what you're saying about if you're discussing, say, an issue to do with disability, you must have a disabled person there with lived experience. And of course you must, but also at the same time, protecting, I found this being open about my illness. And, for a period of time, I was invisibly disabled and then visibly disabled using a walking
mm,
stick and
yeah,
wheelchair and stuff. And people's inquisitiveness and curiosity and wanting to know about things. And I was happy to talk to them, educate them. But there also comes a point where it's like, actually, my medical records are like not up for discussion in this situation.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so also having that kind of respect for people and boundaries. And so like, yes, let's talk about these things, but also like at the end of the day, there's real people involved in
yeah.
this as well. It's not
Again,
just an idea.
again, it's that extreme thing of like,
Mm,
yeah, by all means, asking me about my disability, but going that deep, like I commend you if anyone's been asking you about full on, like, all right, tell me your medical history because
yeah.
that is a new one on me. Um, but I think, yeah, it's just not doing it to extremes, and I think
Mm,
as well, I've always talked about on this podcast, I want to create a referral culture because I know one of the rebuttals for the people that don't necessarily have the same belief I do is we shouldn't always have to be the poster boys and the poster girls and the poster people for
yeah.
people with disabilities. And sometimes we don't want to have those conversations, which I 100% respect. Sometimes you wake up with a disability and it sucks. It absolutely sucks. So the last thing you want is Steve going, "What happened to you?"
Yeah.
But then that's where I want to create a referral culture where I say, look, I'm not in the mood today. Go speak to Lily. She'll give you an insight into the world of disability. She'll answer any questions you might have. She's very open. I'm just not feeling it today. Or
Yeah.
give them the resources to go, I'm not feeling it today. Therefore, can you please go do some learning yourself and come back to me in a few days once I've cooled off?
Yes. I think
Because I
that's
think
great.
I have to then I hold so much responsibility with the whole idea of how you react to someone who has no exposure to disability
Mm,
then interacts with another disabled person. So to get put that in a perspective where it's quite visual is if I go and have an interaction with someone and it's a very aggressive interaction, unfortunately, that because my biggest character risk one of my biggest characteristics is I'm a guy in a wheelchair, that is also going to be the assumption that people are going to
yeah.
make about everyone in wheelchairs. That as soon as you bring up the words disability, it's like I'm going to bite your head off. And
Yes.
I hold that responsibility and I've been criticized for it before, but then I just think then I know I've done my bit to improve things for disabled people in terms of just developing that understanding. And that isn't me criticizing anyone that doesn't want to do it. I just have always openly said I'm one of the weird people that get a weird kick out of it. So I enjoy it.
And that's why this kind of like referral idea that you were talking about can be
Yeah.
great.
I mean, I say with me, people will know there is no topic that's off bounds for me. So I'm
Mm.
like, look, people don't, if they want to ask weird questions, direct them my way because I say I get some weird kick out of it. And I also think this is going to make for a great story one day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, from my point of view as well, doing the work that I do, language is really important. And so that's where I come from when I think of like, yes, the intentions and maybe and having some guidelines about how things are maybe helpful and constructive to think about in a way that isn't upsetting or threatening or offensive can be really helpful, but we just don't want to lose our way within it.
It's also language is a really tricky one as well because there is so much nuance to it.
Mm.
Again, I don't really. It makes me feel weird when someone refers to me as a person with a disability. Now I know that's person
Mm.
for language, and a lot of people use it, and I completely understand it. Just for me, just personally, it just feels a bit weird. It feels like someone's trying too hard. Yeah,
Okay.
like
Yes.
okay, all
Yeah.
right, yeah, we get it. You know all the cool words, fine. But again, but it's all down to personal. I'm not saying that people should or shouldn't use it. I think with language, that's the worry I've had when educating people. It's like people all want different things. They all want to be known by different terminologies, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then, from an education point of view, that makes it really tricky because you can't really give someone a general rule of thumb apart from try and identify early on what sort of language they want to use. And there's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with having that communication, but you've got to be aware enough to do it. And for
Mm.
Joe Bloggs that's never met anyone with a disability, your default position is not going to be that. And
No.
it's a very, very tricky thing. Anyway, we've ended up on a very, very big tangent, but yeah, it's also made me sit and think. So thank you. That sometimes I love having these conversations because then I sit there and
Good.
go, how do I answer this? And then often finish this episodes, guys, and go, why did you say that? You sound like a mug. And then we then come back to what we've spoken about all of this episode, which is
Yes.
negative talk and how we need to change that.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
But thank you so much for coming on, Lily. It's been an
Thank you for
amazing
having me,
conversation.
Charlie. Thank you.
And I think so many people are going to take away so much from this because I think it affects so many people.
Well, yeah, I just hope it, yeah, reaches someone who might find it helpful.